Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our next episode of Six Figure Certified Coach. I have a really special guest here with me today. I'm so excited. I'm like, if you're watching the video, you see I'm like beaming. Kristina looks pretty excited too. This is a little bit of a reunion for us back to freshman year of college.
Correct.
We met in college. We were living on the same hall. And this is Kristina Ellis, everyone. Welcome, Kristina.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you here. I've been watching your career, I guess, a little bit from afar over the past. Ooh, this is going to reveal some things. When did we graduate? 2009?
2009, right?
Yeah.
Ouch.
Ouch. So, like, not 15 years, but basically 15 years ago.
That's wild.
Yeah. So it's been really cool to see your evolution and all the things you've done, which many of them we're going to talk about today. But can you give us a really brief introduction of who you are, your books, what you're doing now with your career? Just give us like the highlights.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do a quick 15-year recap.
Yeah, quick.
Yeah. So a big part of my story is I won over $500,000 in scholarships to go to college at Vanderbilt. So I was able to go debt free and then go to grad school debt free. And from there, when I graduated, I looked around and had so many friends who were drowning in student loan debt. They were like, why did no one talk to me about money before I started college? And now I have all this debt and I just had no idea, what this was going to look like after graduation. So from that, I wrote a book about paying for college. My first book was on scholarships, and then my second book was on all things how to graduate debt free. And there was just a lot of need in the market. It's not really what I set out to do when I was in college, but there was just so much need that people just really wanted the content around how to go to school debt free. We're in this crazy student loan crisis. And it's like, if people aren't going to talk about it, I'm going to be the person to talk about it and tell students they don't have to go into crazy student loan debt. So for the last several years, I've been writing books, touring the country, speaking to students in high schools and colleges about how to go to school without debt. And then with that, got contacted by Ramsey. They were looking for new personalities in the money space. And now I work full time with Dave Ramsey and his company, Ramsey Solutions, co hosting The Ramsey Show. And we have a podcast that basically The Ramsey Show talks about money 5 days a week, 3 hours a day. We take calls from people all over the country who are trying to navigate, paying off debt, building wealth, and just all things money, and just love it. That's where I'm at now, and just loving getting to press into helping people pay for college, but also just figure out their finances overall.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that so much. There's so much that I want to unpack, like right off the get-go. But I think what we should do is first take people back just a little bit. So the whole theme of season 2 for our podcast is telling the behind the scenes story, right? So often we see people online, we see people out in the world who we compare ourselves to, and I call it their after story, right? Like when we see someone, and even if I'm like looking at you and I'm like, oh my God, look at Kristina, like I'm seeing in part your after story, and in 10 years there'll be more of an after story, right? But what's so fascinating to me is understanding people's before stories. And so my understanding, and I want to hear it in your words, is that you had some loss growing up, and your mom came to you and had a pretty honest conversation about where she'd be able to help and where she wouldn't. And so it's not like you're like, oh, I got $500,000 in scholarships,
Right.
which sounds like an amazing, win, and it is. But my understanding is that came from somewhere really deep and heartfelt and from a need. So could you tell us about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. My story had so many obstacles, especially early on. So my dad got diagnosed with cancer when I was basically a toddler, and he had a really long and painful battle with brain cancer. We were constantly dealing with seizures and just everything, being in and out of hospitals, and he eventually passed when I was 7.
Hmm.
And it was really hard on our family. Our family dealt with so much grief. Explosive arguments were common in our home, and we were all just trying to figure out how to live life without him. My mom was an immigrant from Venezuela, and so she didn't speak strong English. She was trying to figure out how to be a single mom, how to make money, how to support 2 kids in a country where she didn't know a lot of people. This was not where she was from. And I tended to go inward with my pain. I tried to hold it all in and act like everything was fine. even when it wasn't. And that eventually led to a hidden pattern of self abuse. I started just taking the pain out on myself. And it eventually led to this moment where I almost took my own life. I
Mm.
decided that that was it. I'd had it and it was just too much, and got literally seconds from the point of no return. And the phone started ringing. And it was like 11 o'clock at night. It was at a time where no one should be calling. And it was my aunt just randomly calling to talk. And we got lost in a conversation about happy things. I did not tell her what I was about to do. We just started talking. And a few hours later, it was like what I was about to do was miles away. It was like I completely forgot. Woke up the next morning, the sun was shining through my window. I felt happy. And it was like all of a sudden, the night before came rushing back. And I was like,
Mm.
oh my gosh, I almost threw everything away in just a single dark moment. Like that, literally everything was almost gone in one night because I felt bad. And it really shocked me and scared me. I decided, that's it. I cannot keep living my life like this. I can't keep playing with self destruction and fire. Like I almost went too far. And so, I was young. And so it started with like really little steps. I was like, anytime I feel bad, anytime I feel like I'm getting lost in these dark emotions, I'm going to start fighting to do something better, even if it's simple, like going on a walk or listening to an inspirational song. Like I'm going to work on changing my mindset around this.
Yeah.
And I did. And I just started getting really involved in activities. I found that I loved volunteer work. Helping people helped me feel better. I did a lot of sports and activities. And so that was kind of priming me for the conversation with my mom freshman year. And she sat me down and just basically was like, Kristina, I love you and I really believe you can do great things with your life, but I don't have the money to support you after you graduate from high school. So you're on your own for college and you got to start figuring out how to pay for it. And so she talked to me about scholarships and was like, there's these great things called scholarships. It's free money for college. If you work hard now, you can go to school completely paid for. And that sounded amazing. So I just started doing a ton of research and got super involved in high school and basically treated the scholarship application process like a part-time job my junior and senior year. I was like, this could literally change my life. I don't have to live my entire life struggling with money and living in a low income household. Like I can change everything now. So that was a huge motivation and thankfully it paid off. I was able to win over $500,000 and it changed everything.
Yeah. It changed everything, but you changed everything. And that's such a powerful story. Thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing with us. I know that your story is going to speak to so many people. Like we go through, life happens and we have these pains and these traumas that happen that are uncontrollable. And then mental health plays such a big role. And it's not really our choice in certain moments how it's affecting us, but we have these little moments and these little turning points, like your aunt calling you and then waking up the next morning and being in a different element and then being brought back to the pain and suffering, and then having those choice points and saying, I need to live differently, I need to choose differently, and how am I going to do that? And I just think it's also so important to point out these small steps that you took every day to get your mental health back on track, to get your happiness back on track. I mean, I truly believe, after the loss of my brother and my own struggles, that it is the small things every single day, like sometimes many moments throughout the day, just readjusting ourselves and readjusting our minds so that we can have that the after story that we want to have. But it's so many small choices.
That's so good. Absolutely. Yeah, it's the little things, it's the little conscious decisions continuously over time that add up, that stack up. They may feel like no big deal in the moment, like I'm just listening to a song, but it's getting you out of that rut. It's getting you out of that negative mindset.
Yeah. The other thing I love, Kristina, is, it sounds like your mom came to you freshman year of high school and you sort of started plotting at that point, right? And so a
Yep.
lot of kids, like, or let's say not even, kids or young adults, but we want something in our lives and we're like, okay, I'm going to figure this out in the next 2 months, or I'm going to figure this out in the next few weeks. Or I remember like finding scholarships and being like, oh shoot, I missed the deadline, right? Like you were plotting because you had a goal in mind and someone had lit a fire under your butt, and you started plotting and planning. And I think it's so important to understand that, yes, you had this huge win, but look at all the time and effort and thought that went into it to get you there. So I would imagine you approach a lot of things in your life that way with like that level of strategy and the execution. Could you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I love just taking the time to strategize and plan. I feel like that's one of my things that I'm most passionate about is just taking that time because you're right. Freshman year, a lot of students aren't motivated, but I'm thankful I had a mom who did cast that vision where she's like, life isn't perfect now. You haven't had the easiest life, but if you fight now, literally the choices you make right now can impact you for the rest of your life. And so
Yeah.
having that vision helped. And just I think one of the biggest secrets to success for me is that like I just don't quit. Like I think that,
Yeah.
freshman year I was willing to continually put the effort in and, you know, a lot of kids don't do that, but a lot of adults don't. Like we constantly face obstacles, but being willing to continue going, even getting here to Ramsey, this is my dream job, being able to do the Ramsey show and all of that. And it's funny because a lot of people could see it and go, oh, wow, like she just joined the team and got to, be on the Ramsey show in the first few months. But it's like, we graduated 15 years ago. That was, 10 to 15 years of continuously building my business and getting out there and doing the work and showing up every day and handling rejection, handling trials. It's just being willing to stick with it, even though it's hard. Like you create this plan and you create this vision, and it's not always going to go how you had planned. But it's like as things come up, you just have to be willing to also shift and continually create new plans and keep going.
Yeah. And I would even take those 15 years and add like your 4 years of college and your 4 years of high school. Like your story was happening during that time, right? So you
Hmm.
just said something. You said, Ramsey is your dream job. And I want to ask you this question because I always think it's so fascinating to think of ourselves when we were younger, the dreams and visions we had for our lives. And did you see yourself on TV? Did you see yourself being a personality? Like, tell me about that.
Gosh, that's so interesting. It's interesting looking back and kind of seeing seeds, right? Like
Yeah.
when we were in college, I don't know if you remember, but I wanted to be a country music star at that point.
Yeah.
So it's like I went into college with an economics major, right? And so like I'm feeling like I enjoy stuff around money, but I get to college and my first economic class is like all about like the global economic macro, you know, political conflict in Asia. And I was like, this is not for me. Like, I do not enjoy this. And then I also had this desire to be on stage and connect with people and be
Mhm.
in front of an audience. At the time, like the idea of being a personality in a personal finance company, like I don't think I even knew that that existed. I don't think I knew
Yeah.
that was a thing. And so it's like I switched majors. I went away from economics, but I always felt this draw to helping people with their money and being able to, just do it in front of a crowd. And so it's just interesting because it's like I don't think I always had the long-term vision of what this job was, but it was like constantly taking the next right step, right?
Hmm.
Building skills, being in front of an audience, learning how to do media hits, doing things like that. There were just little opportunities that kept showing up, and it's like just doing it diligently over time. Even with the money space, it's like, oh, personal finance, right? Like I don't want to do this like larger political sphere of money, but people need help with debt. People need help with building wealth, and just seeing that revealed over time. It's just been interesting to see how that became more clear. There wasn't like a perfect path. There's not a major in college that leads to this spot. It's just kind of continually taking the next right step.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like we can only really create a vision from things we've seen.
Mm,
And so I remember in college always like saying to my dad, like, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I don't know what I want. And I come from a very well established family business. And the rule was kind of like if you're in the family, you work for the family business. And of course, you could do something else. But, unless you wanted to do something really specific, it was sort of like, well, why wouldn't you help the family business? But that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to pave my own way. And I remember my dad literally saying to me, Katie, your dream job probably doesn't exist, meaning like it doesn't exist today because I was in college. So he's like, the technologies and the opportunities that are going to be available when you graduate, and then it's going to keep evolving. And he's an entrepreneur, so he comes from that mindset. Your career has been so entrepreneurial, like we couldn't have even created the vision for exactly what our careers have become or will become because we had only seen certain examples, right? So you were like,
Yep.
no, well, if that's finance, I'm pretty sure I dropped out of that econ class too, by the way. But if that's finance, if that's economics, that's like exactly what I want. Like, okay, let me go be a country music star because like I like people, I like, right? And so, but you're pulling from all these things that have made you who you are. And like you said, you just kept following like the best next step. And I think also you're such an example of being true to yourself, like being true to your self expression, being true to your story. And, right, like now we live in this world where everyone sort of is building a brand in a way, right? But I feel like you did that really early, like before it was trendy and cool. Like you are a trendsetter.
Gee, thanks. Thanks. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and I think that just resonates so much that there are often careers that you can't totally know exactly how to define them until you're in them. And there are times where it's like you just have to take the steps before you even really know where they're leading. And it's like I especially early on was so I got to have my 10-year plan. I got to have my 5-year plan. I have to have all the steps. And while I love planning and I love creating vision, there's also just leaps of faith at times where you're like, okay, I just have to, I don't exactly know how this is all going to work out, but I know that the next right thing is building this specific project or working with this person or writing this book or, like sometimes it would be lovely if we could see the full picture before we started, but sometimes it just doesn't exist yet. And it's like you have to be able to take those leaps of faith and give it your all and go all in before you know exactly how it's going to turn out.
Yeah. I want to ask you about your first book, and then I want to ask your opinion on something else that's a little controversial. But
Ooh.
um, first, your book. So I also remember, when did you publish your first book?
2013.
Okay. So that was like 4 years after we graduated from college. And I remember seeing it like probably through like Facebook or Instagram at first, like
Yeah.
had a book. And I remember you being like one of the first people that I knew who had written and published a book. And beyond that, like around your own story. So again, not that like everyone writes a book. I don't want to like downplay that at all. But again, my sense is that that was like sort of a real trailblazer moment for you. And I'm curious like where the inspiration came from, what made you feel like, no, this is, enough of a story to put out into the world. Cause a lot of times it's a confidence thing, right? Where everyone's like, oh, I want to write a book. I want to write a book. But like you did it and you did it pretty young and pretty soon after college. So I'd love to hear where that came from.
Yeah, that's so interesting. My story, I feel like, is a bit non-traditional, especially for doing it young, because I actually did not plan on writing a book. So, I was doing music in college. I still double majored in business. I planned on going corporate after graduation, and it was one of those things where it's like, if music didn't work out, I actually chose Vanderbilt in Nashville because of music, and it's like if that doesn't work out, then I'll just go into business in some capacity. And that was the path I was on. I was about to graduate from a master's program, and I sat down with a mentor and just casually started telling my story, which I actually was someone who was very closed off about my story. We didn't talk about it in college. Like, I did not make it known. Like, I grew up low income and I had all these struggles and battles. Like, I just wanted to fit in. I wanted to leave the world of being in a low income household and fit in at Vanderbilt and be cool and all of that. So it's like this was
Fitting the
not
finger
something
belt is another topic, but yeah.
like this was not something I shared. I wanted to move socioeconomic statuses. I wanted to fit in. And so the fact that I told this mentor, I think we were just talking about scholarships. And I was like, yeah, I won scholarships. I had to work really hard. And he just kept digging into my story. And he was like, have you ever thought about writing a book on this? And I actually was like, no, not really. Like being in Nashville, everybody's a singer, everybody's a songwriter. Like, I don't need another creative dream. I'm trying to go into business now. And he challenged me. He was like, Kristina, you have been given so much. Like, that is such a blessing and a gift that you got scholarships. You should turn around and give back to people who need help.
Mm.
And I was like, gosh, when you say it like that, like that feels like I do need to do it. And he had a syndicated radio show. He's like, I'll help you self-publish this book and we'll market it through my radio station. And so the plan was still for it just to be a really small book. And it was just going to be a tactical scholarship guide. like super simple, get it out there. And I saw it like I was going to take a year of service. Like we had friends doing JVC and Peace Corps and serving the world. And I was like, okay, even if like two people read this book, at least I'll like get it out into the world and help some people who were struggling through similar things that I went through. And then he ended up saying, I'm going to show this book to a friend who was a publisher. And I didn't really know it at the time, but it was apparently a pitch. I thought we were just going in for feedback. And I went in and kind of shared my story and was like, I'm passionate about helping kids because it's like I can see myself in them. Like, I need to help these kids. And at the end of the meeting, they were like, all right, we'll have the paperwork to you next week. And I was like, what paperwork? And they offered me a publishing deal, which was crazy. But the challenge was, they were like, this book is great tactically. Like, it's got a lot of good scholarship advice, but we want you to double the length of the book, and it needs to primarily be your story. And we want you to go deep, and we want you to share all the messy parts. And I was like, no.
Oh my God.
But it is what kids needed to hear, because so many kids, when they go into the scholarship process, they just don't believe in themselves, and they feel like their story is icky or messy and they wouldn't be worthy of a scholarship. And it's like, when I started my journey, I wasn't a perfect student, I wasn't a star athlete, but I was willing to fight and hustle. And so I wanted to encourage kids to like fight through whatever they're going through. And it was
Yeah.
really cool because the book got out in the world and it connected with a lot of people. And what was really interesting was a lot of the emails I received, they were, I got about half from people saying I won scholarships, and the other half from people saying, I was thinking about taking my own life. I feel self-destructive and I didn't feel hope, but I read that book and it made me feel like I should fight for the future. And that just meant the world to me.
Yeah. Wow. That's so incredible. This is what I'm talking about. Like, we see people's after stories, and even if we know a small piece, we never really know the depths of things. So it's so important that we tell the truth as
Right.
much as we can. It's hard because sometimes we go through things and like I don't even know what happened. When I first went through the loss of when I lost my brother in 2015, which was the same year that we started IGC, I was like, I literally, like, my whole world was just turned upside down, and it took me a long time to even put the pieces back together to understand what had happened.
Yeah.
And still today, it's been like 8 years and I'm still like processing parts of it. And I'm sure, having experienced traumatic loss, you are too. And then when you go to start a family, it brings things up, right? And so it's like
Oh
we're
yeah.
living with these things, but most people are living with some kind of invisible pain. And I do think that your mentor gave you such great advice. And obviously, you were the one who said yes to it and had to, buy into that challenge of life to say, yes, I worked for this, but I also figured something out, both with my mental health and with money, that are two crazy hot topics, but also sort of historically taboo. And yeah, like, I'm this living, breathing, beautiful picture of truth, and I can tell my story. And now I'm at a place where I have the stability in my life to be able to do that. It's just so powerful.
Well, thank you. It's definitely taken a lot of courage because it was not something I wanted to share. Like, even in that beginning phase, it was like, I feel safer within these confines of, seeming like everything's perfect and having it
Yeah.
together. But it's really, there's so much power when you're willing to be vulnerable and you're willing to share those messy parts, because you're right. Most people are struggling with something. Like, everybody's got something going on. And it's like, when you're willing to put your story out there, it helps people feel like they're not alone in that struggle.
Yeah, it's like when you see a before and after picture of like a house that got remodeled, or you watch all those TV shows. If you just saw the after, you'd be like, "Oh, it's beautiful." But when you see the before, you're like, "Whoa, you did a great job."
Yeah, you're like, that is even more impressive. That was a lot to deal with.
Right. So, and it gives people hope, right? Okay, so I this is one of the reasons I wanted to interview you, or one of the questions that I really wanted to get your opinion on. So, in the coaching industry, there are a lot of companies and in the entrepreneurial space too that, train you or certify you to become a coach or to become an entrepreneur, and to learn about this world, right? And it's become a huge market. Like there's so many coaches out there. There's so many classes out there. There's so many courses. There's digital courses. There's live courses. There's weekend workshop courses. There's a certificate for $7. There's a certificate for $70,000, right? Like
Why?
it's wild. And one of the big things that I've heard over the past 10 years that I've been working in this industry is that a lot of companies will really kind of pressure people or even just suggest things like, the way to make this happen for yourself is to open up another credit card or pull out a credit card. I literally, Kristina, when I was telling the girls on our team that I was interviewing you today, one of the women on our team shared the story about how she was like just doing competitive research and like set up an interview with another training company. And she said that the guy on the phone was like, okay, tell me the total amount of money that you have in all of your bank accounts right now.
What?
Then I'm not even joking. Then tell me what each account is for. And she was like, oh, well, this is like house savings. And he's like, well, why don't you pull from that account for our training program? And she goes, I just told you it was for house savings. But this is the kind of manipulation that is happening in the coaching space. And it's been happening for years, right? Like you can look online, like scams in the coaching industry, like it's a whole thing. So
That is wild.
it's wild. So when I first started IGC, I had gone through a coach training program, and I don't want to say I'm like debt adverse. Like I'm not going to be as extreme as like you or like Ramsey, but I don't like having debt, and I pay off all my credit cards every month. And this isn't going to be a confessional, okay, guys? um, But when I went through coach training, it was like, I think it was like a $1,500 a month investment. And that was like a small mortgage, right? Or a big mortgage for some people. Like that was like a mortgage. And I told myself, Katie, if you're going to make this investment, you have to pay it back to yourself by the end of the course being over. That was my deal to myself. So fast forward when we started IGC, like I was so upset by seeing like friends and colleagues in the industry going into debt to be able to afford to launch a business when the whole point of having a business in my mind is to make money. I mean, and to help people and be of service, but like you need to be profitable in order to reinvest in your business, pay yourself, etc. Right? So I was like really upset by this. I'm like, and I grew up in an entrepreneurial family, like fourth generation. So this shit was like hammered into my head at the dinner table. Like you're in business to make money and to be of service, but you have to be profitable. So
Right.
all these people were starting these mini businesses with, solopreneurs. It was one person or maybe they had an assistant, but they weren't making any money. And I was so devastated by this. So we started IGC, and our whole, premise was that we can't force them, but we highly encourage and train our students to make back the money as they go. So that's been my solution to the problem in the industry, and I can share more about that if we get to it. But I'm curious about, one, what are your thoughts about these training programs, asking people how much money they have and to pull out their credit cards? And two, like what do you advise to women or people who want to start businesses, maybe don't have the cash flow in the moment, but what are some ways that that could look?
Gosh, that is such a interesting question and statement. And yes, I'm going to be far more radical. But I mean, we even say, so here at Ramsey, we just don't do debt. Aside from mortgages, we don't do credit cards, no student loans. And I think it's so interesting hearing more about this industry because, I mean, it sounds like taking the issue with the student loan crisis and just moving it further into adulthood and making, this common feeling around student loans, just continuing it into after college.
Mm,
And you have to have that to get an education. And so we're pretty radical. Even with college, we say, take student loans off the table, take debt off the table completely. And then it's like you're way more likely to get creative in finding solutions to do it debt free. And I think, especially as an entrepreneur and in business, you're not guaranteed success. And the more you lock yourself down with debt, the more you're really strapped with your ability to move forward. If things don't go perfect, if things take 2 years to launch, if they
mhm.
take 4 years to launch, if you suddenly have a credit card payment that is due that month, what is that going to do to your ability to continue forward? Then you have to make the money. Like it's not just let's set the goal of making your business profitable. you have to make it profitable or else, right? Like you
Hmm.
can't just not pay your bills. So the ability to be creative, the ability to take risks, the ability to do what you really want with your business is then limited because now you owe someone,
Right.
right? You
Yeah.
owe someone. So I even Dave here, he's built this amazing company, got over 1,000 people working here, this beautiful campus, and he always says we move at the speed of cash. Like if we don't have the cash to do it, then we're not doing it.
Yeah.
And he's built this empire doing that. So it's proof that it is possible. And I just really encourage entrepreneurs before you swipe that card to learn a lot about financial literacy. And I would challenge, and I know a lot of people don't agree with this, but I would challenge you to set the parameter of I'm going to do this debt free. I'm going to build my business without taking on credit card debt, without taking on loans. And yes, you may need to go a little bit slower. You may need to work in a 9 to 5 job a little longer or
Yeah.
side hustle, but why not go ahead and create that margin and that income on the front end to build your business debt free versus constantly feeling like you're trying to catch up, like you are owing someone else. It's like you can do that. You
Yeah.
can definitely set yourself up to build it on cash.
Yeah. I often tell incoming students, like, and even students in their first um, year with us, that let your day job be your investor, you
That's
know,
good.
because so many people, unless my only caveat is like if you're in an abusive situation, some people do have really unhealthy work situations and you need to like, leave the job and get multiple other small side jobs while you're making this happen, fine. But I completely agree with you about not putting so much pressure on your business to succeed so early on. I mean, really ever, right? Like you don't want to get into a position where you have to get clients or you have to pay this bill or you feel so much pressure over it because especially when you are a big part of your business, right? Like you're a personality in your business. Maybe you're taking sales calls, maybe you're doing a lot of these business functions. You can't also have this looming debt over your head that is then creating this urgency for other people that is false and is just within you. That's not healthy.
Right. Well, and a lot of people, like you said, they're leaving a job that's maybe toxic and then they're looking to entrepreneurship to fix their problems. And it's like the answer may actually be that you just need a different job for a season until you can get back on your feet because it's like you may need to deal with healing from that toxic relationship. Like
Mm,
entrepreneurship may be the next step, but it may be a year from now. It may be once you have your own stuff figured out because if you're in that toxic cycle and you're like, I need to escape the 9 to 5, and then you turn to entrepreneurship and you take on debt, then it's like you're just locking yourself into another unhealthy situation that could cause
yeah.
stress and anxiety. It's like just be careful, especially when you're feeling stressed out from a job,
Yeah.
what you do to take those next steps because entrepreneurship is not easy necessarily. There are definitely
No.
challenges along the way and I've had plenty of roadblocks and things that didn't go as quickly as I thought. And it's like to then feel like you have created a time pressure, a time stamp because of debt. That's just unfortunate. It really can inhibit a lot of your creativity and ability to actually maintain it long term and to stick with your investment as long as it takes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's really important. I think it's important for people to know that like if they're on the phone with someone and they feel uncomfortable and they're saying, "Okay, well, can I just get your credit card?" and you're not ready to make a decision or you don't have the funds in your account or they're asking you prying financial questions that literally make you feel uncomfortable, like you can just hang up the phone, right? Like
Yeah.
you do not have to, because it's like to me it's like preying on people. Like there's like
Hmm.
people out there in the world that want to make a difference with their lives. They want to become an entrepreneur, they have an idea, they want to become a coach, they want to help people. All of those intentions come from a pure place, but then there's these people out there who in my mind, like I said, they're like preying on vulnerable populations who maybe want to leave their day job and they have a dream, but that doesn't mean that you should put everything on the line and put yourself in a place where you feel more unstable.
Yeah, and think too, like, is that who you want to learn from? Like, is that
Yeah.
who you want to build your business based on? Like, do
Yeah.
you want to make people feel like that? Because if you're paying money to that coach to teach you how to make sales, then their tactic that is making you feel squirmy is then how you're going to be taught how to sell. And it's like, that is not a fun business model to sign on to. So, yes, if you're starting to feel uncomfortable with the sales process, then even more so, like wave the flag and go, no, this is not how I want to start my business. And it's not how I want to then build my business. I don't want to make people feel like this.
Yeah. No squirms. No
Yeah.
squirmy vibes.
No squirms.
Okay, so what are some ways that we can invest in ourselves without going into debt to do it, Kristina? Tell us.
Yeah, well, goodness, there's so many great ways to do it now. Like living in the information age we need now. If anything, we have the challenge of narrowing in on what information is good versus like, is there enough information out there to improve, right? So
Mhm.
obviously, books are amazing. I think that even to today, they're still undervalued with a lot of people. Like you have brilliant thought leaders who are taking their life stories and their most amazing tidbits of information and writing it in book form for you to read. Like,
Mhm.
take the time to read books, read lots and lots of books. They always say leaders are readers. You know, do that. And even if you're on your debt-free journey or you're trying to be as frugal as possible, the library is an amazing resource. I feel like
Yeah.
our generation sometimes thinks that like, that's like old school, but I freaking love the library. And it's like now you can often have free subscriptions to Hoopla and Libby and all this access to audio and digital books completely for free. So make sure you take
Yeah.
advantage of that. Conferences are still great. I know some of them are starting to get sky high in price, but there's still a lot of really, really great conferences that are very affordable, and especially ones that have amazing networking opportunities where you can meet people in your field who can become mentors
Mhm.
and you can really connect with. I love doing mastermind groups. I know a lot of, especially in the coaching world, that's starting to be a very high dollar item, but I've done some very organic mastermind groups where it's
Mhm.
like people who are, also in the field and have a decent amount of experience and we can kind of brainstorm ideas and just build off each other. And then there's just also incredible podcasts. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased, but we have the Ramsey Show here. And if you're feeling stressed out about money, we literally put out 5 episodes a week, 3 hours a day, 15 hours of content completely for free. And so just encouraging you to take advantage of those free resources and learn and build and just really, even though there's so much information and content out there right now that's free, a lot of it is gold and just figuring out which one's going to be most valuable moving forward.
Yeah, I love that. That's so many great ideas. I think people get overwhelmed with, at least what I hear is people get overwhelmed with the information on the internet. But I think one of the biggest learnings I'm taking from our conversation today, and I would really ask our listeners to take with them, is patience and spending time with these things, right? Like just because your best friend's starting a business doesn't mean that you have to, or just because you have a great business idea doesn't mean someone's going to steal it, like, or that someone else is going to do it. I think that there's a really delicate balance between taking action and getting motivated and having momentum and rushing the process and being sloppy about
Mm,
it, right? Sloppy
absolutely.
or financially, um, not smart, and just understanding what we're getting ourselves into. And that's why I think a lot of times, like a slow build, it's kind of like relationships, right? Too. Like
Yes.
sometimes a slow build is actually what we need and what's going to get us to where we ultimately want to go. And it's not a rush. I encourage people to, go for their dreams, but also really map out plans. And I think that's the other thing that I see so many people just completely skip is like they don't have a plan. They don't have a business plan. They don't have a project plan. They don't have, maybe they have a high level goal, but you can have all the goals in the world. If you don't have the building blocks to get there, it's not going to happen. Right. So I think this is so important for people. And I also just love that you talk about reading and the importance of either reading or listening to audiobooks. And I remember there was a time in my life where like I just felt like I was changing so much and the people around me, like, my friends at the time weren't on the same path. And I had this like breakthrough moment where I was like, when I read books from authors who I respect, who I would want to be my peers, it's literally like having a conversation with that person. And I would like write in the margins, and I still do this to to this day, where it becomes a conversational piece for me. Now, I don't know if you can write in the
So
art
good.
and take it back to the library, but you may have to make an investment to do that. But right, again, it's like, you know what, $10 to $15, and if it makes sense for you, then hopefully it makes sense.
Yeah, that's so good. And I just hearing you say that, I think another really important piece, especially for the life coaching industry, but mine too. I heard somebody say recently to take the time to build a life that you love. And if
Yeah,
you build a life you love, like your business is going to flow out a lot more naturally from it. So it's like if
yeah,
you're a life coach, if you're coaching people, like actually being satisfied and content in your own life before you try to help other people do that is so
yeah,
important. And it's like with me and my journey, like focusing on what we're doing with our money and taking the time to make sure, we're happy and we're living our fullest life is going to
yeah,
help me better serve our audience and just be able to be more authentic in the way we're communicating. And so it's like with the whole rushing and the being patient, it's like being patient, it's like if you are rushing and feeling miserable in the process and it's causing a bunch of stress and anxiety, like what kind of business are you going to build? Like how are you going to be able to serve people well if you're not serving yourself well? So
yeah.
take that time to really build a strong foundation in yourself.
Yeah, I think money has a lot of like energy with it. Like it could be positive or negative. And if you're not in the right energy and money is
Mm.
contributing to that, like the stress from money, then yeah, it's gonna go all the way through. It's gonna affect your clients, it's gonna affect your product, it's gonna affect the books that you're writing, it's gonna affect all of it.
And
So
then you're going to be the shady person on the other end of the line asking
money.
the girl about all her bank accounts and
No,
trying to like
no.
scam her money out.
Oh my God. Oh God. I was like sick after I found that out.
Oh gosh, so slimy.
So slimy. Okay, Kristina, thank you so much for your time today. Where can we find you? Obviously, we know you can find you on the Ramsey podcast, but where else can we find you and where can we buy your books?
Yes, I am most active on Instagram. You can find me at I am Kristina Ellis, Kristina with a K, and you can also find me at KristinaEllis.com.
Yay. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was really special.
Thanks for having me. This has been wonderful.